Good evening. My name is Gillian McCluskey and I'm a member of the Scottish Laity Network. Tonight it is my absolute privilege to welcome you to the final evening of our Advent Journey 2021. As you know, the overall theme for our Advent Journey is Mary of Nazareth, Companion in Our Journey. This was the name that the 6th Interchurch Gathering of the Base Communities in Brazil in 1986 gave to Mary. The name was rooted in their faith and their practice. As a companion, Mary walks with them and is seen as one of them, experiencing their pain and sharing their hopes. She is in total solidarity with those she walks with. In his message for this year's 107th World Day of Migrants and Refugees, Pope Francis challenges us to move towards an ever wider we.
Salvation history has a we in its beginning and a we at its end. And at its centre, the mystery of Christ, who died and rose so that they may all be one. The present time, however, shows that this we, willed by God, is broken and fragmented, wounded and disfigured. This becomes all the more evident in moments of great crisis, as is the case with the current pandemic. Our we, both in the wider world and within the church, is crumbling and cracking due to myopic and aggressive forms of nationalism and radical individualism. And the highest price is being paid by those who most easily become viewed as others. Foreigners, migrants, the marginalized, those living on the existential peripheries. The truth, however, is that we are all in the same boat and called to work together so that there will be no more walls that separate us, no longer others, but only a single we, encompassing all of humanity.
Let us spend a moment in prayer by reflecting how we advance together towards an ever wider we. Can we move from they are drowning to we are drowning? Can we move from they are seeking refuge to we are seeking refuge? From they are being detained in a hostile environment to we are being detained in a hostile environment? The list is endless. Let us spend a minute in silence, allowing the Spirit to prompt us towards an ever wider we. It's now my pleasure to welcome our friend and companion, Alison Phipps. Alison was with us last Advent and it's a great joy to welcome her back. Alison holds the UNESCO Chair in Refugee Integration through Languages and the Arts at the University of Glasgow, where she's also Professor of Languages and Intercultural Studies and Co-Convener of Glasgow Refugee, Asylum and Migration Network. I will hand over to Alison now.
Thank you so very much indeed for that lovely set of words and prayers and reflections. And it's just a real joy to be back with you. This is the last thing I'm doing before I break for Christmas, and it feels really appropriate to be back with you. I really feel as though we're becoming friends to one another, and particularly, I know this is a little partisan, but particularly want to acknowledge that there are people here from my hometown of Sheffield. Um, and that just really fills my heart with joy at the moment. I grew up in Sheffield, lived there for many years, know all the carols of South Yorkshire, the ones now that Kate Rusby put on her album, but that was my Christmas in the past, singing those around the streets until I was hoarse. Um, these days, I seem to be spending my time speaking until I'm hoarse. So do forgive me if I do sound a little bit croaky. I have water beside me, but I have been online in Zoom calls since 7 a.m. this morning, and it was the same yesterday and the day before. These are long, hard days for those of us who work and live inside of the hostile environment, and are really at its cutting edge at the moment. Um, so I am really grateful to you for bearing with me. I'm going to just share my screen so you don't just have to look at me, but you can look at some of my slides as well. So let me just do that and put this up onto the full screen here. There we go. And I just want to pick up those words that Gillian left us with about leaky vessels, about being in the same boat and thinking about this as leaky vessels. And it's less than 2 weeks since we had the tragic news of the loss of, we think, 31. We don't actually know exactly how many people who drowned in the English Channel, and who were attempting to reach safety from the camps in Calais. Camps is a bit of a grand word for the places where people live. People imagine these are refugee camps, maybe with facilities, but these are areas where the security state in France has really banned people from offering aid and offering assistance. So camps is a bit of a grand word. Médecins Sans Frontières, who are one of the most extraordinary charities working in this field, have really condemned the French government and many other governments, including the Greek government, for the way that they treat asylum seekers in their camps, the way that these become permanent when under European law we really shouldn't have any refugee camps, because people should be enabled to integrate and live a full life in society. We're hearing also regularly from all kinds of organisations, including organisations run by faith groups, MOAS being one of them, but also from many of the Italian organisations undertaking rescues within the Mediterranean of continued drownings at sea. These vessels are leaky vessels, and I think I want to keep that image of a leaky vessel in mind. We are all in the same boat, but some of our boats are cruise ships with an apartheid system of those who haven't necessarily even been granted an immigration status working to service those who are on the top decks. And I also want to begin by sharing love, greetings and apologies from my dear friend Omaid Sharifi. Omaid, until yesterday, was absolutely convinced he would be with us, and he is now begging me to find a date in Lent when he might be able to join you. Omaid is one of the art lords of Afghanistan and one of the most remarkable people I think I've ever met. This is an image of him here in his studio in Kabul before he had to flee. He experienced what we were all watching on our news streams at Kabul airport. But on the day when the Taliban were due to enter Kabul, he put a message out to the world saying the art lords will be painting in the public space on the blast walls that absolutely line Kabul. He's a peacemaker, a man of great creativity and vision and immense courage. And in his leadership of what is a participatory arts project, he has found ways of really gathering the world to look upon the destruction, the death, the devastation, but also the beauty, the joy, and the hope of the people of Afghanistan who have experienced so much war. And so it was his vision to paint the blast walls across Kabul over the years since 2014, when ArtLords were founded, and to bring colour to that greyness, to bring life and vivacity and messages, to bring commemoration of people who were being killed in bombings of schools by the Taliban, or who might have lost their lives in what is laughingly called friendly fire. And it was his image to do that, but to enable others to be part of a participatory process of enabling people to be able to just walk past on the street, taking their kids to school, and then stop for a moment and pick up a paintbrush and some paint and start to paint images. This was Omaid's vision and what he founded, and I was privileged to meet him online during the pandemic, to do some recording with him, to make some podcasts about his vision of peacemaking in the world, and his vision of art as something which, to me, in the way he describes it, is akin to the work of faith, because he was saying that these spaces, these images on blast walls, are how we can hold vigil, how we can remember people whose lives have been lost, how we can bring a message of peace and of love to the whole world. So this is the work that Omaid has been doing with his designs, and this has recently been picked up by my colleague Karima Benounin, who has just stepped back as from the Office of the High Commissioner for Cultural Rights, as a really key element in cultural rights of bringing forth the right of all people to practice cultural expression in the world, and to assert their cultural right to freedom of expression. Now, of course, with the arrival of the Taliban and the painting in the public square, Omaid's life was endangered, as was the life of others who were part of painting the murals in Kabul. And within a couple of days, I was getting messages from him on my direct messages on Twitter just saying, Alison, I'm at the airport, we're doing our best. Can you get this message out? We're starting a crowdfunder. We need you to advocate and campaign to try and get artists out. Artists' lives are at risk. But we also need help to get people out of Afghanistan, because there aren't any safe routes out other than the evacuation. And the lists are long, and it's chaos here and it's carnage here. This was very much my experience, just receiving messages from people like Omaid, but also people like my friend and colleague Sabir Zazai, from his wife Jose, from my friend and colleague Mohammed Asif, who runs the Afghan International Human Rights Network, and from Abdul Bastani, my friend who runs Afghan United, the amazing football team, which covers far more than the Afghans, but he would be the first to tell you that they play the best football, but actually brings real energy, peace and harmony to the lives of many an asylum seeker and refugee in the city, just by kicking around some leather with serious intent. And I don't need to tell you how important that can be to people. But all of these people were in touch with me during those very difficult days in August and early September as we were trying to bring people out. I remember at 9 o'clock at night being intently typing away on my keyboard with messages from Omaid and messages from others saying, we have people, they are eligible for evacuation. Can you get them on the Foreign and Commonwealth Office list? And of course I couldn't. I couldn't because, as we now know from the whistleblower testimony, the Foreign Secretary of the time was asking civil servants, there was only one staffing the inbox for much of this time, but asking them to reformat the requests in a different sort of font or table, rather than saying, yes, bring these people out. Knowing that the Office of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom had overridden the right of United Kingdom citizens trying to help bring their staff who had collaborated with them with the British efforts in Afghanistan, trying to get them onto evacuation planes, refused to put them onto planes whilst they intervened for their colleague and friend pen farthing to be able to get out and also bring his animals out, his animals which were not under threat from the Taliban. We since know that the group that were not able to get out were sent to the Pakistani border by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and High Commission in Afghanistan, but sadly had to run the gauntlet of the Taliban. Some lost their lives, some were imprisoned, and that the leader, a British citizen, was put into prison and was tortured for 6 weeks and has still not left because he refuses to leave without his staff, some of whom, whilst eligible, have not yet been granted safe or legal routes. Omaid made it out. He was messaging me for quite a long time from Doha, watching what was happening to his beloved murals. And on the day when we held an interfaith vigil in the Memorial Chapel at the University of Glasgow, Omaid messaged me to say that his beloved murals were being painted over by the Taliban. Images like this that were showing women learning to read, that showed children joyful, that showed children walking to school, that showed women in traditional, beautiful Afghan dress. Images like this of grief and commemoration of those who'd been lost in previous regimes. Images like this, which I have on my desktop at the moment of my computer so that I remember every day. This commemorates the teachers and the children at a girls' school who were all killed, 70 of them. The red rose commemorating them, the love, the shoes covered in blood, the eyes, the image looking into Kabul as a sign of memory and memorial. And it reminds us very much and makes me think of that beautiful image of Mary flanked by the 2 security guards. But this work that we do to make image in the face of death. One of my favourite slogans as a Christian about what our work is that we are people who sing in the face of death because we know that death is not the end, that the grave is not the end. And it's here that I join with my brother Omaid and with my brother Sabir and with my sister Jose to also, with those of other faiths, commemorate and remember those who have passed, but also refuse, even when the Taliban is painting over this image, to let this image go. So it sits on my desktop alive with the life that Omaid and the people of Kabul created as they painted this. And it was also the image that we chose to project onto the walls of the Memorial Chapel as we held a vigil and sat for half an hour in silence with a candle, just gazing upon this life that remains, this life that is painted over, this life that is projected, this life that we hold and refuse to let go. One of the other pieces of work, beautiful pieces of work, which has been used all over the world by Omaid and his team is this. They've basically used hearts everywhere. One of their images was of a bomber plane flying over Afghanistan that they painted on one of the walls, dropping hearts, not bombs. And here you have a woman with a traditional basket from Afghanistan holding a heart up to the sky, up in faith, up to the world. And a candle. In the place of the grave, in the place of the hijab or the burqa or the niqab, in the place of that image, a candle just holding us, holding us, holding us in memory. Now I know that Omaid would want to say a lot to you about his experiences. When he was in the airport, one of his big concerns was what people would do in that place of great fear for the days while they were waiting. There were no toilets. Women and children were having to defecate on the ground of the airport tarmac. And Omaid turned up with disinfectant and brushes. And rather than using his brushes to paint, he used the brushes to clean up the feces, to clean up the urine, to clean up the menstrual blood, to clean up the mess, to clean up the signs that we know actually in that space of the great incarnation, these bodily fluids that tell us that something is alive, but also tell us of fear. Omaid was there trying to make this also, this place of acute fear, a place of dignity. on the day of the bombing, just outside of the airport, my friend Jose phoned me up in a real state of great distress, saying, my brother is at the airport, he's trying to get home, he's a UK citizen now, he can't get out, and he's phoned me up, and he's just been caught up in the bomb blasts. There are bodies everywhere, and his clothing is covered with parts of other human beings. This, my friends, my brothers, my sisters, this is the horror of war, and this is why we gather around a candle, to say no more, to say no more, to say no more. And this is why we also journey in hope. And I want to share this image from COP26 of the journey of little Amal. And many of you may have seen the Walk for Hope, and this puppet, this giant 3-meter high puppet, little Amal, who's symbolized and walked from Syria all the way to COP, and has found a place for herself, a home for herself in Europe, and arrived in Manchester, but has been and visited many towns and cities. The members of my team, particularly my former PhD student, Dr. Catherine Evans, with my artist in residence in the UNESCO team, Tawana Sitole, were part of staging an absolutely extraordinary welcome to Amal for COP. 6 primary schools staging an intervention along the Clyde with beautiful gestures of love and welcome. And there's nothing about seeing children greeting something quite as odd and strange as a 3-meter high puppet, little Amal. And they're all there going, do you think she'll touch me? Oh, I'm really scared. She's coming. She's coming. And then cheering and laughing as she held her hand out gently to bless them in peace, to stroke their cheek, to touch their heads, to hold them in a hug. Beautiful human-like gestures from inside this puppet as the puppeteer is engaged in this puppet made by the same people who designed Warhorse, so that when your head moves, then Amal's head would move, and when you nodded, it would nod, and when she was miserable, then it would express in her eyes and her face. This is her beginning a walk. We didn't know where to, but from Kelvin Grove Park, emerging as the sun went down, listening to the music of the Nevis ensemble, Nevis being that old Scots Gaelic word for hell. This ensemble of the street orchestra that played as she walked, and she walked dragging this tree behind her. And we walked in a procession, and she fell twice. Here she's fallen against a lamppost. And at one point she stopped to wipe her face, and somebody in the crowd gave her a handkerchief. And I realized that here we were in an Easter procession. These were stations of the cross. And here we had Christ come again amongst us as little Amal, as an 11-year-old girl, an unaccompanied minor who had lost her mother and who was walking with us towards the world powers, towards Jerusalem, walking towards that destination that is the place where we must all go in a pilgrimage of hope and love, the place that is the Via Dolorosa, the place that is the Via Negativa, the place where she is accompanied by those who might betray her and those who will help her carry her burden. And you can see there people helping carry in the way that Simon of Cyrene helped her carry her cross, helped her walk the way. It's one of the most profoundly moving pieces of theatre that I have ever seen, that connected theatre back to its ritual roots within the Passion plays, within the Greek dramas, and right into that Easter story and also the Christmas story that we would perform in the mystery plays. Here, little Amal walks, and we walk with her in a crowd, many of us weeping, many, many faces that I know from faith groups and from the refugee and asylum groups, recognizing their story and her story, the way we walk this way. Eventually, she arrived at the railway arches at SW3, where the United Nations designation began. And there you can see her beginning to walk away from us. She said goodbye to us, a gesture to her hand to her heart, saying farewell, walking away, then walking back because she could not bear to leave us, and then walking alone in the way that Christ walked alone to Calvary. And we couldn't follow, because to get into SW3 and the New York Times venue, where the glitterati and the literati and the liberati and the policiati were all congregating in a cocktail party around little tables and talking their talk, their blah, 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 as Greta Thunberg would say, she was walking in there, and we couldn't accompany her. We were parted from her at the border because we did not have a passport, and she did for this journey. We'd only been with her for a little while, but that's the refugee journey. People come and you walk alongside them, and then they're gone and you can't reach them again, and they're separated from you. And she went off and she went in, and the people I know who happened to be in that New York Times space that night said she went in and she turned over the tables in that temple, and judgment fell on the world leaders for what they have done, for what we have done, and for what we must be. So I want to bring you finally to a moment of hope, and to really offer you something that you too can do, and to share with you some really personal moments from my year since I was last with you. One of the really encouraging things that has happened is that all the different refugee organisations and faith organisations have begun to come together, and you might, as a network, want to join the Refugees Together movement. You can drop them an email and just say, please sign us up. They regularly put letters together. They include organisations like my own, but many others. Sabir Zazai is their president and chair at the moment, but it's about sharing love and hope. You might have seen on social media orange hearts appearing. The orange heart is just a sign that we love. That's all it is. We're together with you, all together, all as one. And we're all doing all kinds of crazy creative things and posting them on social media. And I know that Rab has encouraged you that you might have something you want to share, maybe a candle to light, something orange to bring light and warmth to this very hard time that we face at the moment in the refugee movement and in the asylum movement. The Nationality and Borders Bill has now passed the third reading in the Commons. It includes a provision that has always been there, but which has been radically strengthened, to strip anyone who is eligible of a nationality from any other country. So even if you haven't got a second passport that's Irish, or that is German, or that is from the Sudan, if you are eligible, the Home Secretary, without notice, can now, under this law, deprive you of your citizenship. So at the moment, we're trying to remove that clause. We know that lawyers will have to do their work to campaign against this bill. This is the bill that sought to criminalise the Royal National Lifeboat Institute for rescuing people at sea. Thankfully, thanks to really radical activism, that clause is not in there, but it's still possible to criminalise people for helping people reach the United Kingdom and claim asylum. And yet there is no safe legal route out of any country outside of the United Kingdom from which to claim asylum. It is not possible. All routes are closed. The Afghan routes are closed. The Syrian route has finished. The route that was the Dubs route for unaccompanied minors is closed. So we're in a very dangerous situation where the United Nations Commissioner for High Commissioner for Refugees has said that the United Kingdom with this bill takes itself out of the convention that it signed over 70 years ago. So as part of our work and coming together, because these are hard days for us, we are showing signs of hearts like the ones that I shared with you that Omaid has also been making, these orange hearts. This is mine that my granddaughter cooked with me with the heart cutter in scones, they're cheese scones. But anything you can think of where you can arrange something orange into a heart and tag together with refugees, you will just buoy up a movement that is experiencing more burnout than I've ever known before at the moment. It's amazing just what a smile will do for us. And it is that gesture of solidarity, that gesture of Veronica wiping the tears, that gesture of the guard who gives the vinegar and the sponge on the point of the sphere when people are being sent to their death. The Nationality and Borders Bill is a death sentence to those who might attempt to cross the channel or who might remain where they are. But the orange hearts are really a sign of hope. And finally, I just want to reflect, if I may, and Gillian, I know we're starting to come up to my time, but just reflect, if I may, on what I said about leaky vessels and all those fluids that come out of our bodies. In the time that I've spent in New Zealand, I've spent a lot of time with Maori, and they have told me their creation story, their story of the incarnation, their story of Genesis. And their story is that creation came from the sneeze of the great god Maui. And what Maui did was sneeze out the land. So basically, what they say to me every time I start to cry because it's too much, as I did with Rab and Rosa recently when we were having a conversation, and it was the day after the boats had gone down, and just being in the safe hands of Rab and Rosa just meant that I too just had to cry for what we're experiencing. But that tears and snot and our bodily fluids are all signs of created life. They're all signs of a cleansing or a purging of our systems. They're a sign that life can come. And we know this because we know when we hit a child on the back, as Mary must have done to Jesus before she laid him in the manger, that air rush, that mucus that comes out of a baby's lung, that's life. So I want us all to embrace orange hearts made out of cheese scone dough, and embrace our tears and embrace the sweat and the tears that comes off Christ walking that way, but also to embrace that mucus that comes from our leaky vessels as human beings, the boats that we are as human beings, as a sign also of new life. And I want to share this image with you. This was my happiest day of 2021. This is my daughter Rima, the one with the big smile and the beautiful lipstick, and holding my grandson Sion. That's me with the glasses, looking cool, wearing a traditional Zoria, and with the sunglasses, holding my granddaughter Sienna, who's just been given a popsicle or a pop ice by a Syrian woman who could see that we were standing in George Square on one of the nicest days of the year to celebrate something special. You can also see my husband Robert there with the shades, wearing a kilt. So me in the traditional Zoria, Rima in her smart suit, Robert in his kilt, and then Hiab, who I know many of you know here as well, who has spoken to you on a number of occasions, Dr. Hiab Johannes, a survivor of torture, a survivor of trafficking, and Hiab and Rima got their citizenship on the same day, in the same ceremony, inside the city chambers, and we were allowed to look after the kids and wait for them to come out and celebrate with them. And here you have the sign of hope. This is tenacity. This is what it looks like to really say that we are people. We don't just sing in the face of death. We eat ice cream at it. And we celebrate in the face of death. We know that Jesus was right to celebrate risen life by breaking bread on the road to Emmaus. We know that Jesus was right to celebrate with a fried fish with his friends on the shore, because look at us, here we are doing it again. This strange people of God, these strange disciples who walk this way and who know that joy comes in the fullness of life. So, my friends, just thank you so much for being with us, for accompanying us on this journey, for your love and care, for your great orange hearts, and for all that you do, but most especially, thank you for your prayers. I cannot tell you how they sustain us in our struggles. Thank you.
Alison, thank you very much. I mean, where do we start with everything that you've shared with us tonight? I can imagine that there will be so many who've tuned in tonight who are just taking a breath just now, who are taking a moment to ponder not just what you've shared, but the images that come to mind as you've done so. And amongst that, for me, the haunting image of Kabul airport will be one that stays with me. Friends, please do take some time to share your own questions, your own comments, your own reflections in the chat as we have this discussion time now with Alison, and I'll put some of your questions and comments to you, Alison, as we do that. But I wonder, and it's not an easy question to start off with, Alison, it never is, but you've spoken about the importance of prayer, you've spoken about the importance of witness. Within that, what do you think? What can we do? You've spoken about witness online, you've spoken about prayer. I know that that's in our group, that's very often the first question that comes up. What can we do? What should we be doing now? I'll let you unmute, Alison.
Myself, there we go. Let me unmute myself. Thank you. I think, I mean, it's a question I'm asked over and over again, and presence matters. Your presence tonight, I can't tell you what it means. And I've literally just come from the establishment of a cross-party working group in Scotland on migration, refugees and asylum that has been led by people with experience, by former refugees themselves. Pinar Aksu, who is one of my PhD students, but also was a child detained in the immigration detention system in the UK years ago. Really brave people. But the gathering online, there were 40 of us. And it was just, there was a joy there, even though these things are so hard. To gather together is a joy in and of itself, and it is still a right that we can enjoy. So gathering in prayer and saying words like the ones that Gillian and you, Callum, shared, they matter greatly. And I never underestimate the power of prayer. And it isn't everyone's calling to be on the front line. Not everyone knows how to run a destitution network. Not everyone knows how to chair a policy committee. Not everyone can be in the corridors of power saying what needs to happen. But what every single person who is doing that frontline work at the moment needs is to be wrapped in prayer. And I think one of my experiences of COP was that we were wrapped in your prayers. I mean, it was extraordinary, the witness of faith at that time around the world. And those certainly staying with me, we had members of the Malawi delegation from SCIAF, who SCIAF had brought over. They were staying with us in the house, and just absolutely wonderful to have them with us. But it was prayer that sustained them. It was the knowledge that we would pray. It was the knowledge that we would take their prayers and hold them in good faith that mattered. But in terms of other actions that might come from that, I do think the online witness it's a small thing. It takes very little, but it's that little creative moment. I'm seeing a lot of people in Kent at the moment. Kent didn't used to do all that much. Now they're on the beach every week drawing hearts and lining the hearts, all wearing bright orange and forming human chains to say, we're with you. The other thing that I think that people of faith can do, which people who have not had a long practice of prayer may not have in abundance, is I think in the coming years, we will be needing to hold vigil for the dead on an increasing basis. We are having to do that with COVID already, but I think we will see many more people dying within the asylum system or in the Channel unless there is a radical change of policy. And there will be many more deaths within the asylum system. And I think we know that death is not the end. That story I shared from Omaid of the, you know, the image to commemorate the dead being painted over by the warlords who wish death upon particularly women and girls, and a deathliness there, that determination to hold it, to use those images. And I know that Omaid has said to me, you know, anyone of prayer who wishes to use these images from their website, I've laminated them and sent them up to Iona Abbey, just that a candle might be lit there, that they remain in our consciousness and spread. I think these are things that we can do, so that, you know, what we had in George Square just the other day in Glasgow was not a demonstration, but little tiny spluttering candles that they kept going out and we kept relighting, and they kept going out and we kept relighting, and we stood in silence, largely young people. And I think holding a vigil, 2 or 3, that's all it needs. Wherever you are, in your churches, in your communities, in a place of commemoration, just holding a light and knowing you've done it, that is an action. That everywhere I've ever been in the world where there has been change, it comes from that action of bringing light. You know, from, you know, the amazing light chains that were part of the Leipzig demonstrations before the wall fell, you know, light chains, they're part of it. They're how we can join. And I think those are things we can do. If any of you, however, at this moment have friends who are in the House of Lords, or have any friends who you know are Lords, or would like to write to any of the Lords, particularly those who are Conservative Lords, and say to them, please get rid of Clause 9, please do not criminalise people seeking asylum. That letter, it can be really short, but right now the Lords and the bishops are looking to know there's a constituency behind some of the things they want to propose as amendments before this bill goes through. We may still have, through the House of Lords, I never thought I would say it, an opportunity to actually get some of the really egregious clauses taken out. People like Lord Dubs, who obviously came on the kinder transport, people like Lord Kerr, who has spoken very powerfully, people like Lord Hope, who has a legal background. They are very keen to hear, and there is a website called They Work For You, and you can write to Law Lords. I've used it in the past with people like the wonderful late Baroness Williams, Shirley Williams, who picked up my own case and raised it in the Lords. There is real desire to do it. So if you are someone who has a couple of minutes to send Christmas greetings to the Lords and see if we can get, you know, 9 Lords a leaping, that would be a practical action. I think that might answer your question, Callum.
And I wonder as well, I'm thinking out loud, Alison, but of course, the current moderator of the Church of Scotland is a Lord himself. And, you know, perhaps as people of faith, that's a route as well.
Yeah, and I think he would particularly welcome, you know, in his role as moderator of the Church of Scotland, but also as a Lord himself, people from outside of the Church of Scotland writing to him and saying, I'm writing to you, you know, in solidarity with refugees and asylum seekers and people who might have their citizenship stripped, to, you know, encourage your action in the House of Lords, and to do that from the Catholic faith would be really wonderful as well.
Just on that point, Alison, we're being asked a couple of questions. First of all, are there any particular Lords that you would recommend people are writing to at the moment?
So there are a number, but I think Lord Kerr, Lord Hope, and Lord Dubs, particularly. And I'll just dig out the website as well.
I've got that here, Alison. I'll stick that in the chat just now.
But to be honest, I mean, any of the Conservative Lords, and particularly anyone you might have got a connection to. So if you've got a Lord or a Baroness, there is, you know, Baroness Davidson. She has recently been elevated to the Lords. I think she has long done good work in this area and has been distancing herself from some of her Prime Minister's policies of late. She may well be somebody who could also be written to at the moment. So those would be people I would be suggesting.
I'll maybe go with a slightly lighter question now. We have been asked, Alison, is it significant that the walls in your room are orange?
Do you know, the only significance is that we haven't got around to decorating this room yet. And it just looks so warm that I don't really want to anymore.
And the other thing I'll say, Alison, is there's a great deal of love in the chat for both Omaid and Hiab, of course, who we've met before. So, please do pass on that to them, and we welcome them when they get an opportunity to join us, in Hiab's case, to join us again. Next question for you, Alison. Is the UK unique in promoting a hostile environment, or is this a growing trend across Europe?
We're seeing a growing trend across Europe. You'll have seen the images on the border with Poland and Ukraine, which were absolutely heartbreaking. We're seeing the closing of the borders. The Mediterranean has long been a grave. And I know that Hiab has spoken really powerfully to you about the experience of the 371 people, 30 of whom he knew well, who drowned in the sinking of the boat off Lampedusa in 2013. And that artwork that he also shared with you, that is just the most beautiful image, but of the child that was born underwater and that washed up on the shore, connected by the umbilical cord to his drowned mother. This has been happening for a long time. None of this is new. It's just new in mainstream consciousness. My own daughter was rescued off the coast of Lampedusa in 2008. And it's just on our shores now. The numbers of people claiming asylum by landing through this route are smaller than they've ever been, certainly in the last 20 years. So the idea that we are being in any way asked or over asked to do our part to uphold the Refugee Convention, which includes burden sharing and does not require people to claim asylum in the first country that they reach. It allows people to think, where have I got family? Could I be with them? Could I be with those I love? Could I be with those I want to care for? Could I be with those or in a country which has got a connection to me? Absolutely, that is part of the right of anyone in claiming asylum. But we are seeing some countries in Europe closing their borders at the same time as others saying, no, we can do it. You may have seen some of the really quite moving scenes of Angela Merkel, the Chancellor in Germany, the Bundeskanzler, stepping down. And, whatever your politics, and her politics are certainly not mine, I would love to have been led by her and under her leadership. Such sense, such humour, such focus, but also such courage. And she was a woman who allowed herself and her mind to be changed, as Jesus did, by an outsider, by somebody who said, but why might I not be able to eat scraps off your table? It was a Palestinian refugee in a wheelchair who said, why do I have to be deported? And Angela Merkel got down off the stage and she went over and she knelt by her and she tapped her on the knee and said, listen, I'm really sorry, but sometimes we have to do very hard things in these roles that we have in politics. And there was a deluge of scorn on Angela Merkel for that moment of what people said was false sympathy. And she heard it. And quite soon after that, thanks to the advocacy and the courage of refugees and asylum seekers, she said, we will do it. We will take 1 million. And interestingly, the Chamber of Commerce in Germany has just declared that it's the taking of 1 million that has meant that Germany hasn't entered recession and that actually its finances are quite buoyant, alongside the granting of the right to work for asylum seekers and refugees very quickly, because that has led to the stimulation of many small businesses that are obviously generating revenue, not just for people to send home to keep their family in dignity, but also to enable the economy to grow. Again, why in a time of great skill shortage and job shortages within the UK we will not allow asylum seekers to work, I do not know. But lobby your MP, keep them going. Carol Monaghan, the wonderful Catholic MP for my constituency, is doing everything she can, leading a private member's bill to bring forward the right to work. And if you want to do a little job of actually just encouraging the MPs who speak out, if they vote on these issues well, please do. They get such hate in their postbags. Carol Monaghan had to be taken to a safe house because of the death threats against her. These people need our love and our prayers. You know, this is a dangerous time. We've lost 2 lawmakers, David Amess and Joe Cox, in the last 6 years. These are dangerous times to be a politician, and that's nothing compared to the death threats that people have had, like Joanna Cherry, like Carol Monaghan, who are our own MPs. So there's a lot of love and care and support needed. And just a couple of lines to the people who stand on the front line, from grateful people in their constituencies, makes all the difference. It just makes all the difference. I can see Liz has got a hand up. Is it possible to take Liz's hand? Because she's waving at me frantically.
Hi, Alison.
Hi,
Thanks.
Liz.
Nice to see you again this Advent. And thanks go to Rab as well for inviting us to do our something orange tonight. So I went a wee bit wild with orange hearts. But I wanted to share with you, and I want to thank you because in 2019 during Advent, I put together a short reflection for a women's group, and I don't know if you've came across it, but it was a beautiful exhibition that was held in the Gallery of Modern Art, and it was done by poetry and pictures and print screen by 8 women who were asylum seekers and refugees. I don't know if anybody has came across it. And so there's some poetry and some pictures. So I want to thank you, because just during the week it came into my hand, and tonight I've got the opportunity to use it. And the reason why is because I used it, so I've done my wee orange heart, and I took a quote from one of the poems that one of the women had done. And it says, every experience on this planet, every journey has a meaning beyond our imagination. And it then goes on to say, I have to keep going. And I've added a smaller heart that says, I have to keep going. You have to keep going. We have to keep going.
Beautiful.
So thanks for reminding me of this. And there is a picture of the women at the back of it, but it's too small for everybody to see. But it was a beautiful exhibition, very heartfelt exhibition as well. And I suppose it's called You Are the Light. And I would just want to end by saying both you and Omaid are lights.
Oh.
So keep shining.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you so much. That is really kind, and I'll be sure to pass this on to Omaid, and and I'll get Rab to maybe send on, or Callum to send on some of the lovely messages for him in the chat, just so that he knows what a profound influence his work is having. And I don't know if I said he's had to fly to Albania to do some work, and he's currently with the Prime Minister of Albania. Yesterday he thought he would be with us, but right now he's with the Prime Minister of Albania. So we kind of forgave him that.
I think an acceptable excuse, Alison, definitely. Our next question, if I might, it starts by saying, Alison and Omaid, you seem to be jointly holding in yourselves in creative and new ways of holding together the 3 attributes of priest, prophet, and king. And the questioner says, is it presumptuous to suggest that you are helping to redefine how we interpret these ancient theological roles? What do you think, Alison?
Gosh, that's a really profound question. Do you know, it was when I was experiencing the Little Amal walk that I was also beginning to think, and COP in particular, and I've been on this journey kind of into exploring what the church might be outside of the church, but within the church. What does it mean to be working with people who have none of the legacy or the schooling and the formation that I have, and none of the facility with the Bible and prayer and liturgy that I am steeped in and so grateful for. And how do we then, speak the good news? So how do we do mission without that being proselytizing, and yet hold together and draw together a younger generation, but also the many who are on the margins, and coming to us from different places. How do we hold them in a way that can help us reimagine and retell the old stories, but also connect with the stories that they are experiencing? And I think, liberation theology has long helped me in that work, of seeing that we imagine Jesus in our suffering, as our friend in that suffering, as the one who's gone before us, as the one who accompanies us. And I think we imagine him and see him in his state of prophecy, in his state of kinship, and in his priestliness. And I think there's something for me in the understanding of what it means to be part of the priesthood of all believers that is trying to think, how might that be for us at this moment in time? And in quite a similar way to the way I think that other thinkers, like, I go back time and again to Hannah Arendt, to Martin Niemöller, to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, to these difficult figures in National Socialism who were brave and courageous and were able to speak out, but also to all the people who just hid people, the people who didn't speak out but did the action. And how do we then rethink that as a theology of action for these days? So I think there is work for us to do, and I think there's particularly important theological work for us to do within the churches. Within the Iona community, we have a network that's looking and that's been leading on some of this work with the Lords recently. But we've also been just saying, it is creedal to us within the Iona community to seek peace and pursue it, and to understand that peace will only come with justice, and to tell the old stories in new ways. And so I do think there is something there about, for all of us within our own traditions, to be thinking and praying with those symbols reverentially. I had a very awkward experience just yesterday with one of my colleagues from my team, and we were invited to a meeting about about objects from refugee communities that are displayed in museums, and the museums were beginning to think about how they might do that well. And the way we've done that work is by not starting from the lifeboat or the life vest as the object, but actually when we're with people who are refugees, saying, you tell us whichever story you want to tell. And I know that when Hiab comes and speaks to you, or when Omaid speaks to you, they are people who want to tell a particular story. But most people, they're just like us, they want to tell you about the grandchildren. They want to tell you that they really actually rather love baking or painting or football, particularly football. And that actually letting people tell the story that dignifies them rather than this story that they wish had never happened to them. That's one of the really important things. And I was really concerned that the museums were really wanting to almost commodify these sites and these vessels of death, the boats or the tents or the life belts, without actually understanding that the majority of refugees just want to get away from those as fast as possible and don't really want reminding of them, and want to remember the things that bring them joy and happiness. And that's actually really good for everybody. So really thinking about how we in churches also curate and liturgize a space. And I think within the Catholic Church and within the Mass, you are absolutely brilliant at this. And I love the fact that when I go occasionally to St. Peter's to join my Catholic refugee family in celebrating, there it is. What they did back home is what they do here. The Mass is the same everywhere. It's also really different. Even though everyone says it's the same, it is really different, but it is the same. And there is something so dignifying to people of finding home in liturgy. So I think holding that, asserting that, reaffirming that, not being ashamed of that is a really important part of the, you know, the reinterpretation of liturgy and of the gospel stories.
On that point of liturgy, Alison, Frank points out that the liturgical theme of Advent is very much prophecy. And he says that your words, your poetry echo that theme, that prophecy, a voice in the wilderness. And I wonder how powerful you think that tool is, particularly, you know, that you spoke extensively when you were speaking about Omaid's work of the power of art. And I'm thinking art, poetry, how powerful is that in your witness and in your work?
I mean, for me, you know, it's the tradition that I come from, but also melding the artistic with the liturgical, with the theological, with the poetic, but bringing it into a reverential space. The wonderful thinker Susan Sontag, difficult, uncomfortable thinker, but she's on it. She's really right about some things, and she talks about the need for us to, particularly in our looking upon the suffering of others, to do it with reverence rather than with commodification. And when I was trying to work out what I was uncomfortable about in the museum exhibits, it was that, you know, my daughter's experience was being commodified in the form of a lifeboat for people to look at and consume. And actually, that isn't what she wants. She just wants she wants my grandkids to have ice cream. She wants to go out for pizza. She wants to, you know, sit around and have tea together. She wants to have friends over. She's cooking a meal and we're going over to enjoy that on Saturday, all being well. And these are the normal things. And so therefore it's no accident that many of the things that we do together as part of integrating into one another's lives is we share food, which is why the liturgy of the Mass, where we break bread and we turn it into something more, is so vital to my understanding of what we do when we also host people as refugees, when we might share a meal with them, when we might, you know, go to the new Syrian cafe or the fantastic, I mean, honestly, Glasgow is now really full of some really awesome kebab houses. It really needed a good injection of some people who would bring that gorgeous Syrian Lebanese cuisine to the city. But those little things, just supporting local business, it's a prophetic act. It goes against the grain. We've a Home Secretary who is saying, do not buy Ben and Jerry's ice cream because they support refugees. I tell you, brothers and sisters, eat as much as you like of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Obviously within reason, and not if you have any dietary reasons why this would be bad for you. But Ben and Jerry's ice cream, Sabir Zazai and I, it's how we keep going. Every time he thinks he can't go any further, I will turn up at his house with 6 tubs of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. And there it is, defiance. It's its own form of agape feast. The abundance of it, 6 tubs, not just one, just says we are people who eat ice cream in the face of death.
That's definitely a quote I'm going to leave tonight with in my head, if not up on a wall somewhere. we eat ice cream in the face of death. That's powerful and one that we'll remember. I wonder, I mean, friends, please continue, share your questions, your reflections. We do have a bit of time left. Returning, Alison, to the point around the House of Lords and around influence and around writing, do you think the cardinals, the bishops within the Catholic Church, have any influence over, for example, the Lord's Spiritual? Do you think that's a helpful route? Do you think that's something that should be pursued?
I mean, I'm seeing some remarkable cross-party work and cross-faith work going on. I absolutely think encouraging the cardinals and the bishops to write to the Lord's Spiritual is really valuable. The more unity we show from different areas of life, faith, work, the stronger this would be. And I really think it's a time to just encourage them. And we have, you know, in the wonderful leadership of Pope Francis, you know, and his remarkable generosity and modeling of humility and hospitality, and his work, particularly in his latest encyclical, just the way that he has seen the figure of Christ in the migrant and brought that to us as a place of meditation, a place of prayer, a place of action. I think, you know, to be fortified by his words, to fortify the cardinals and the law and our bishops, and to ask for them to intervene um, so that great sinfulness is not undertaken in our nation, and so that we do not lose something quite as precious as the Refugee Convention. I think that is, we are in desperate times, and we will need that in future.
And I know that when Rab sends out the email with the recording and such like, I know that Rab will include that link to They Work For You, and we will support you in any way that we can to encourage friends and members to write and to act and to campaign. I also wonder, you mentioned earlier, Alison, about the images and resources that you sent to Iona, and I wonder if you might be able to share them with Rab so that we too might provide them in our own parish communities as a space for prayer.
Absolutely. I mean, they're largely just the images that I have from Omaid, but I will send on some of those JPEGs and images to Rab. And I can also send on the slides. I'll take the one of my family off, because you don't all need to see Sienna dribbling ice cream down her beautiful white dress. But otherwise I'll send them on to you so that you can use some of those images in your own meditations.
Thanks, Alison, because I think that notion of us then taking that simple idea into our own parish communities, a simple prayer space, is so powerful, so reflective. If I might ask a question then, Alison, and I'm thinking, you know, in particular from an education setting, and I'm thinking of young people who come to us, you know, young people, young refugees who come to us still perhaps quite raw, still perhaps with emotions running high, and not entirely sure how to manage that, often to a language and a culture completely unfamiliar. But yet I'm also struck by what you're saying, that so often when you speak with people who have come through such a traumatic experience, it's actually their football, their job, their experiences that they want to speak about. How can we make that real connection in those first interactions with?
I think, I mean, you know, and I'm speaking here, I'm channeling the words of the child psychologist who was a friend of us, member of the Iona community, who sat my husband and I down when we first fostered an unaccompanied minor. And she just said, structure, 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 normal, 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 normal. Don't try and get people to talk about their experiences. They're not ready, particularly as children. They'll be ready when they're ready. It might be when they're 40, it might be when they're 50. And I know myself from going on a therapeutic journey to dig through some of the grotty stuff that was in my life when I was younger. You know, it was in my 50s. It was when I hit the menopause that I began to do that work. It wasn't as it was happening or immediately afterwards. And I think that's just true for any human being, that it was really good advice. And so there are many things that I still do not know about the story of my family and relations, and that's okay. And I have a dear friend in the States who is married to somebody who survived torture. He has never spoken to her about it, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. This isn't holding secrets from people. It's actually healing in the ways that healing needs to happen. And it's very easy for us in the West to think a talking cure is the answer. When I'm doing mental health work with other professionals in the field, in other communities overseas, singing, proverbs, dance, the ability to move your body, the ability to feel your body, to unfreeze yourself, drama, sport, cooking, baking, clothing, with the Iraqi refugees in Syria before the war, nail polish and beauty therapy makeup sessions for women who'd been stripped of their dignity to nothing. Put it back, put it back, put it back. When we were in the camps in Calais, you know, the MPs asked me that same question, Callum, you know, what can we do? What can we take? We've not worked with people like this before. And I said, you're not doing work with them. Just take nail polish. You know, give people, just put some nail polish on the nails. You know, this says you're like me. And this says I have nails too. And this says we're going to be a bit frivolous. And this says it brings life. And this doesn't say I'm your lawyer or I'm your therapist. It says I'm somebody who's got a body too. And I like it to be fit or healthy or beautiful or hungry or fed or slept. It says that. So I think, Callum, I mean, in my experience, refugee work is both extraordinary and, at its very best, utterly ordinary. It's right back down to the basic stuff. And so, you know, for us, we you know, we just thought, right, okay, quick, let's take out a membership to Glasgow Life as a family and play badminton 3 times a week. We were thrashed every time. She was brilliant at it. So we had to find better people to play badminton because we just weren't good enough. So the neighbours then would take her, and one of them was a bit of a demon badminton player. Our daughter would come back absolutely reveling in how happy it made her. And then, you know, we've just carried that on. Abdul's work with Afghan United in Glasgow, it's some of the best work of it around integration that I've seen, because honestly, 5 aside, 11 aside, football, everyone's the same the world over. And that work, that stuff, that's the thing to do. If you're worried about an individual and how maybe that trauma is manifesting, get expert help. Don't do it yourself, do the other things yourself.
I love that focus on those areas of commonality, be it makeup and beauty or football and sport. You know, I think these are incredibly powerful things to focus on.
And I don't make any apologies for those being very gendered. You know, there's something about being able to be restored in body in order to be restored in soul, and often that's quite a basic thing to people. You know, a dressing up box, you know, for people to play with. But also, you might have seen that Refugee have got a new campaign out, and it's fantastic. So Refugee take donations and deliver food parcels and donations to newly around families, and often stuff that we've cleared out and don't need anymore. But they're doing a dignity campaign this Advent and saying, what we want you to do for our Christmas appeal this year is donate money, possibly in the form of vouchers, so that a refugee or an asylum seeker, somebody who's destitute, can buy new clothes for themselves. And again, I was just reflecting back on when our daughter came, and I was seeing how beautiful it was that a bunch of our friends just clubbed together and they said, look, we know you'll do it for her anyway, Robert and Alison, but we just want to give her some pocket money to go and buy her own stuff. And she came back with fleecy pajamas and Doc Marten boots. And it was just, you know, normal stuff, just normal stuff. But, you know, the pride rather than somebody else's cast-offs, you know, it's like a lot of people and a lot of us can do that. But actually, there's something of the dignity of being able to do what normal people do.
I love that, Alison. That's incredible, and I think it changes the mindset. And maybe if I could take the question in that direction, you know, speaking about dignity and about that focus on the dignity of the human person. We've spoken tonight about prayer, we've spoken tonight about campaigning, but what can we do to change public opinion, particularly in those domains where public opinion is far less than positive?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's hard, but it is incremental. And I have seen to take the kind of the hard end newspapers that we struggle with when we're campaigning for this, which would be the Daily Express, the Sun, and the Daily Mirror, the Daily Mail, as the 3 newspapers where it's hardest to get stories that are positive into the press and to change public opinion, but to change the editorial stance. We have been able to do it, but it takes a massive campaign. Most of the time we focus on the centre ground and not trying to waste too much time trying to change people who are fixed in very firm opinions that are quite frankly racist and are highly ill-informed, but are very arrogant about the status of that knowledge. And we find we don't try that. You know, that 20% might always be with us. Just as Jesus says to us, the poor will always be with us. There are just some things we're never going to completely change. And it's in a way why we have these understandings of sin. But I do think that I have seen this time and again with the different campaigns I've been involved with, that working in that centre ground and having a bit of an analysis of who might take it in the more radical direction and pull people over, that's really helpful. You might have heard me speak when I was with you before in Lent, where I was really quite exhausted by the work we were doing to try and reverse the 0.7 to 0.5 cut to overseas development assistance, what's also known as the aid cuts. And my projects that I run across about 20 countries in the global south had been cut by 80%. And I was facing an absolute cliff edge, looking at making 120 people redundant worldwide and seeing projects with highly vulnerable communities around the world being absolutely destroyed by that policy. And we campaigned for 9 months, really hard, right up to COP. We did manage to get conservative rebels to vote against the government, but then we basically had the cabinet and the prime minister saying they wouldn't respect the vote. But we kept pressing on. The Great Missenden by-election was lost to the Conservative Party, and that was largely on the high-speed rail link, but also on the other factor cited was the cut to aid, because many of the people in the shires were very concerned that work they've done in international development and aid work overseas, particularly through the churches, was being destroyed. And they've built relationships over many years. We continued it through to COP, the work. We kept it in the media. We didn't let it go out of the mainstream, including many fringe media, you know, so like the Tablet, you know, like the Church Times. Just keeping an issue alive is part of the trick, I think. And, you know, just to give you another little bit of good news, not quite the best news of the year, though on the work front, maybe it feels like it. We've just got our money back. All of it. All of it, as have all the other researchers whose work has been decimated. We've got an agreement to reverse those aid cuts from 2023. The new Foreign Secretary is saying she'll bring it forward. We're still campaigning to get it all completely reversed. It should never have happened in the first place. The damage done to the UK's reputation has been immense, but it's worth just, you know, there's something about having the long term in mind. You know, I won't reverse the effects of what has happened with the Nationality and Borders Bill in my lifetime. I think it's a 30-year task now to put that genie back in the bottle, to get to a place where we might be a rights-respecting nation again, or whatever comes from it. But this, right now, this is mine to do. It's mine to enable and encourage and support and thank other people when they join us. And I think... you know, so from my point of view, it is just about keeping on. And we've seen this, you know, with organisations like Christian CND. You know, I think about the remarkable Brian Quayle, who is one of my dearest friends in the Catholic worker movement. You know, he's sometimes been the only one holding a candle for nuclear disarmament and against weapons of mass destruction. And yet he's watched it in his lifetime mainstream as a policy across many political parties in Scotland to eradicate nuclear weapons. So I do think, you know, and we've seen it passed in the International Committee. We've seen the resolution in the United Nations. You know, Brian, you know, was in hospital at the time, but, you know, by some absolute miracle of faith, had a dear friend in the bed next to him, and they were able to toast with a cup of tea together that success, which came from prayer and petition and campaigning. So I just think, what can we do? Just friends, brothers, sisters, keep on keeping on. There's a saying from South Africa, Bambalela, which we sing in the Iona community as a song, Bambalela, Bambalela, and it means never give up. Never give up. Never, ever, 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 never, ever, ever give up. And I think it is part of that. For me, that's the spirit of resurrection. I don't rightly know what resurrection is. I mean, I know what the theology says it is, but it doesn't always compute for my little brain. But oh my goodness, oh my people, the Palestinian people, well over 60 years on, and they talk about Samud, the spirit of tenacity, stubbornness, resilience, resistance, never give up. Bambalela coming out of apartheid South Africa. How many decades was Nelson Mandela in prison? Bambalela, never give up. Never, ever, ever give up. And honestly, you know, on this struggle, we've only just started. You know, I started in what, 2005. You know, I'm a baby in this respect compared to the giants of the civil rights movements and the giants who are my sisters and brothers and ancestors who've gone before. And you know, just in that spirit to maybe just remember and commemorate and hold in prayer the family of Bell Hooks, the astonishing educator, Christian educator, liberation theologian and liberation educator who passed yesterday, and whose words were always just words of passion and love. Just these are giants who go before us, our ancestors, the saints, and it is, you know, it's thanks to them that we are here to do this work.
Well, Alison, thank you so much. I think your time with us tonight has journeyed through the wilderness and the darkness, but also reflects, I think, the hope and the joy as well. And I think that's so powerful.
Callum, can I maybe just say one other thing, which is a really personal thing about the wilderness? And so I really hear what you're saying about the prophetic voice, and I hear and I understand part of my calling at times is to speak those words of prophecy, which are about trying to call a better future into being. And I feel those in the way that the Quakers would speak of the quaking. That means that you feel that there's fire in your bones and you've got to do something, you've got to speak. And this, you know, this one's mine to do at the moment. But I do want to say that, you know, in the work that my friend Neil does in chaplaining me in this work, he sees my struggle to go to the wilderness. He sees that I don't want to go there. He sees my extraordinary busyness, my diversionary activities. He sees all the idols that I would rather worship. You know, if you do this, you can have all that. It's a huge temptation. You know, you might get all that money back if you just bow down and worship. Oh, wait a minute. You know, the things that are about these instant gratifications or these temptations, and to be in the wilderness, to sit with the horror of it, and to sit with the worst of what human beings have done to one another, that's not a place I go to easily, and it's not a place I want to go to. And you know, if I can ask maybe for some prayer for myself, I am about to take some time to retreat and to be able to spend time in solitude and to journey into the wilderness and to sit and look at it, to look at what that suffering is and what it means, and to do it in contemplation and in solitude and in silence, and not to have the words. And honestly, as you can tell, words come easily to me, so shutting up is not going to be easy, but I'm hearing it. I need to go to the wilderness. And you know what I know from the psalmists is that God says, I will woo you, I will lead you into the wilderness and speak to your heart. Blessed be our God forever.
Well, Alison, as well as thanking you for spending time with us tonight, thank you for being so incredibly open and for sharing with us. And I'm going to hand back over now to Gillian.
And can I add my thanks? Can I now hand over to Anne Havard, who's going to say a word of thanks on behalf of us all to you, Alison.
Well, Alison, first of all, I'm really sorry that we don't have Omaid with us tonight, but you've brought him to us in a very meaningful way. the way in which his art looks so truthfully at the death and destruction, but at the same time doesn't lose sight of the beauty and the love that goes with it. And one of the things I really liked was the way in which he invited the passers-by, just gave them the brush and told them to get on with it. That's so inclusive. And I'm sure you'll let him know how much we appreciate what he does. And then I come to your own sharing tonight, which is so inspirational, prophetic, and honest. And with so many symbols and pictures and images. The one that stays most in my mind is the one of Amal on the journey from Syria to Kop, dragging the tree. That journey of such hope. And I really like the phrase, "We are people who sing in the face of death and we eat ice cream." I'm not going to forget that for a long time. And as one of us said tonight, you two are both lights, keep shining. So thank you, Alison. And now I think we would like to say a prayer for you and for Omaid, which you've just asked us to do, and we do with great gratitude. Loving God, we thank you for the passion, insight, and witness of Alison and Omaid. We thank you for what they have shared with us tonight. We ask that you anoint them anew with your Spirit, such that your fire may continue to burn within them. Amen.
Let us conclude our evening by praying the Immigrants' Creed. The words will be on your screen and be read by some of our members.
We believe in Almighty God, who guided God's people in exile and exodus, the God of Joseph in Egypt and of Daniel in Babylon, the God of foreigners and immigrants.
We believe in Jesus Christ, a displaced Galilean, born away from his people and his home, who had to flee the country with his parents when his life was in danger, and who, upon returning to his own country, had to suffer the oppression of the tyrant Pontius Pilate, the servant of a foreign power. He was persecuted, beaten, and finally tortured, accused and condemned to death unjustly. But on the third day, this scorned Jesus rose from the dead, not as a foreigner, but to offer us citizenship in heaven.
We believe in the Holy Spirit, the eternal immigrant from God's kingdom among us, who speaks all languages, lives in all countries, and reunites all races. We believe that the Church is the secure home for all foreigners and believers who constitute it, who speak the same language and have the same purpose.
Frank, you should see the option to unmute.
We believe the communion of saints begins when we accept the diversity of the saints. We believe in the forgiveness which makes us all equal, and in the reconciliation which identifies us more than does race, language, or nationality. We believe that in the resurrection, God will unite us as one people in which we all are distinct and all are alike at the same time.
We believe in life eternal beyond this world, where no one will be an immigrant or undocumented, but all will be citizens of God's kingdom that has no end. Amen.
Thanks to everyone for joining us, and we really do look forward to seeing you in January for our synodal conversation, Understanding the Theology of Synodality, with our companion Raphael Luciani. Thank you very much. Good night, stay safe.